Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Scrappy Startups. Today, we're going to be joined by John Wilson. He's one of the founding members of Arbor. You can find them at tryarbor.com. John's personal journey has been about being prepared when opportunity presented itself. Now, this is a reoccurring theme with all of our interviews. Now, what makes today's episode unique is his experiences working at an incubator. His spirit of giving led him to work in an incubator helping other entrepreneurs. Now, incubators can be an alternative to having personal mentors that every founder should consider. It is also an important part of John's journey because Arbor was founded inside that incubator. Connecting with a successful entrepreneur at the incubator is another example of luck being opportunity. Also, we'll explore the pivot that Arbor had to go through to grow. We've discussed the importance of the pivot for tech companies in the past. Very few startups survive first contact with customers. Arbor began its life as a storytelling platform for families to capture the experiences of older generations for the next generation. While Arbor solved a very real problem for every family, as we have also seen from others, not every great problem can achieve escape velocity. Fortunately, the platform Arbor built is one that transcends that single problem. Storytelling is at the heart of how humans have communicated since the beginning of time. It applies to many problems. Their pivot to helping nonprofits drive donations is both a great service and it is their lead bowling pin to success. Also, they applied the leading edge of video, AI, and user experience to building their startup. This represents the next generation tech startup that's able to operate at AI speed. Startups in the last two generations operated at internet speed and cloud speed. Each represented an order of magnitude change in the cost and efficiency of building and operating a startup. We're now moving to AI speed, and this is going to change the game yet again. John is an incredible storyteller himself. We're going to get some great stories about his scrappy startup journey. So let's go on with the show with John. Well, welcome back to Scrappy Startups. I'm joined here by John Wilson. He's from Arbor. If you want to look him up, arborplatform.com. John's one of the founding team members of Arbor, and I'm really taken by his entrepreneurial journey and this company, which I think has great potential in the market, solving real problems. So, John, welcome. And, I'm going to jump right in. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you sort of got from where you started? Was that intention always to be entrepreneurial, or did you have sort of a wild journey to get here?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bill. I'm excited for this conversation. I would say my background is a little bit unconventional. I would not necessarily say that I started out trying to be an entrepreneur. In hindsight, I think it works out that way. And a lot of folks, when you go through these entrepreneurial journeys, always really interesting stories. I was pretty blessed. I was actually from a family of entrepreneurs, never really necessarily thought about it all that much. But grandfather had started his own construction business. My father was also, second generation engineer and started his own business as well. And then, for better or for worse, I think along the way he had guided me into, hey, it's not necessarily all it's cracked up to be all the time. You got a lot of pressure when you're running your own show. So during college, I was pretty fixated on becoming an engineer. So University of Florida, go Gators. We're currently in the Sweet 16. But my dad was a University of Florida grad. We had a whole bunch of family and friends that went there, and great engineering school. And so that was a pretty solid target for me going in. So that was kind of goal number one on my journey. Once I was there, was again fortunate to have a whole bunch of great mentors, but who were much more focused on kind of that corporate career path. So think about trying to land internships early, really climb that corporate ladder for engineering. And that was really my beginning journey. I was very focused. I was working with a couple of Fortune 500 companies like Jabil, doing big contract manufacturing projects, and then GE in their commercial leadership development track, more on the sales route. And along the way, during those school years and working for big corporations, I also had kind of a fun hobby project on the side, which was more in the action sports world. So I was big into surfing and wakeboarding, and I had another good mentor of mine who got me hooked up in the world of Red Bull marketing. So it's kind of during school, was doing both engineering, but then this really creative kind of guerrilla marketing style tactics to grow that brand. And long winding road through school ended up at a crossroads where I was either going to go stay and do some grad school work. I had some job offers to go to more of this corporate career track. And then Red Bull actually gave me an offer to come out for their final round of interviews. So that was, again, kind of an interesting role. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to do it, but decided to just jump on the plane. And I was like, hey, what the heck? Let's go check this thing out. And that ended up being like a pretty pivotal moment in my life. And so, Bill, we talked about this earlier, but that concept, it was a plaque on my dad's desk growing up. It said, opportunity favors the prepared mind. So he'd always kind of implanted this in my brain of, you're going to run into opportunity all the time, but you need to be ready when that opportunity is there to not only just seize it, but be prepared to execute on it. So, pure stroke of luck on that flight out to Red Bull, I was fairly heads down working on a case that they make you do, kind of present to their team. And guy sitting next to me was a multi-time founder and entrepreneur and watched me basically work hard on this flight. And, got to talk to him. And at the end of the flight, he handed me his card and he was like, hey, after you're done with this interview, I want you to come by my office. We want to go hire a data scientist in May for our Series A funded startup. And that was in this really cool intersection of passions. It was with Street League Skateboarding. They were launching a new product that was like Netflix for action sports content. And so, quite literally landed my first kind of startup experience job on that flight. And that was pretty much a game-changing decision for me. It kind of changed my entire career trajectory.
And so, interesting enough, I think we're both alumni out of GE and had the big company experience, which is always great. But at the same time, you took that opportunity on the plane. And so, tell us how you kind of got from that first entrepreneurial activity into Arbor. What was the series of events? And then tell us how you ended up in Montana in that as well. Florida boy coming to Montana.
Yeah, that, like all good stories, starts with a girl. So followed my college sweetheart. She ended up actually getting a job in New York City. So that was kind of phase two of this journey. I'd been working with this group out of LA. I was actually able to attend grad school at the same time. So I got my MBA, was working basically as the data analytics for this Series A funded startup, and then got the opportunity to also work with their investment arm. So it was a small, basically family office investing in a lot of consumer packaged goods. So had this pretty cool experience, was very much excited to go back out and inspired working with these entrepreneurs in LA. And my now fiance, so it all worked out, she landed a job at Google in New York City. And so that ended up being kind of second big crossroads of like what to do. So I decided to follow her to New York. And at the time, I was still working with this venture group. And along the way, we actually came up with an idea, group of us out of there, to try to basically replicate what I had been doing for their businesses, which was when I was in school, I was heads down, not available to take calls, but I was able to be on Slack and send their CEOs messages. So I was basically, a chat GPT bot for hire for a lot of these, busy corporate executives who didn't want to learn how to use all of their dashboarding tools. They just wanted to have their question answered. So I worked on essentially ChatGPT for small businesses. That was kind of my first attempt at founding a startup. It was before these LLMs were really big. So we were building on Google's Dialogflow and made a whole bunch of classic founder mistakes in hindsight that I'm happy to share more in detail about. But big thing in my life, I ended up getting into this group in New York City called the Startup Leadership Program. And that program was designed to bring first-time founders together. So, big thing for us was no one knows what it's the Mike Tyson. You don't know what it's like or everyone's got the plan until they get punched in the face. And I feel like that's so true with startups where it's like, hey, here's my plan. It's going to be great. And then once you're in the ring, it's, a very different game. And so that organization taught me a lot just by giving me a great peer group of other founders to be around, and then showed me a lot of the kind of errors that I was making. I ended up taking a really brief hiatus in the startup journey and went and worked at Google. So I ended up working on their advertising business, but kind of stayed involved in that New York City tech scene. And so helped run that program for a number of years and was working directly with my now partner here, Dimitri. So Dimitri is the CEO of Arbor, He had been running the startup leadership program as the executive director. And we basically partnered together and helped run that program over the course of 5 years together. And basically, along the way, what happened was while I was at Google, COVID hit. So we were actually coming back out to Big Sky, Montana. My fiance's family has been out here since the early 70s. And we came for what we thought was going to be a week-long ski trip and then never left. So I've been very fortunate, went from downtown Manhattan overnight and came out here. And then Google actually decided to do what was more or less like a reduction of workforce. They didn't call it that publicly, but it was a call return to office. And so they put a line in the sand and said, hey, everyone's got to be back by this date. And so that became a pretty easy demarcation point for me to jump into Arbor full time.
And that's great. So you and Dimitri were working in together at this sort of incubator tech startup learning environment, and valuable lessons. Like you could see every startup, you could see people make the same mistakes. Any insights from that experience on being an entrepreneur, starting things you got to know on day one that rarely you do know?
Yeah, absolutely. I could go through a laundry list of ones that I have personally made the mistake on and tried to, very much preach to other folks to avoid the same mistakes. My biggest one personally, I would say, and it's really obvious in hindsight, and after you feel the mistake happen, it makes a lot of sense, but in the moment doesn't necessarily feel intuitive. But it's really just talking to customers. And it's talking to customers in a very specific way. There's a great book on this whole idea called The Mom Test. And, if you go to your mom and you say, hey, mom, I have this really great idea for this, cooking app on your iPad. Wouldn't that be great? What is she going to say? Of course, honey, you're so smart. You're going to be successful. Go ahead and build it. It's a very different conversation than if you go to your mom and say, hey, mom, how do you look up recipes? The answer might be, oh, I don't. I just have my recipes written down in a book. Well, guess what? That iPad app was never going to solve your mom's problem because it didn't exist. So for me, back in version 1.0, when I was building my first company, we spent a lot of time building what now would have been a very cool product, but we built kind of too broad and we were a little bit fearful of talking to customers, some of which were stupid reasons, like the classic, oh, someone's going to steal my idea, which almost never is the thing that actually kills a startup. It's like competition is pretty much the last thing. If you get to that point, that's amazing. And the real thing for us was like really deeply understanding and having those customer conversations, which is something that we've been very dedicated at Arbor. We've literally talked to like thousands of our customers in 30-minute long interviews and trying to really deeply understand those pain points before you spend time actually coding anything to build the product.
So how do you decide to go to Arbor? Help us understand how you got to help found this company and why this was the one.
Yeah, absolutely. So I generally think about things now around what gets me excited from a problem to solve, number one. And then number two, it's who are the other humans that you're going to be spending your time with. You spend a lot of time with the folks you work with. My fiance now jokes that I probably spend more time with Dimitri than I do with her, which is probably accurate at some point in our relationship. But for us, so the main thing that actually crystallized Arbor for me was interesting. It had very little to actually do with the kind of current version of the business, which is funny how these startups transform. Version 1.0, we were hyper focused on trying to preserve family stories. So it was really kind of in the family history space. And the personal catalyst for me was I lost my grandfather. And so this concept of, all these stories are the things that we end up really missing and talk about as humans. It's this like really amazing thing. And now we have this technology in our pockets that we can record and save the laughs and save the stories and preserve those for the future generations. That kind of concept was so in our face during COVID that everyone kind of experienced social isolation and loss. And so we really kind of honed in on this idea of like, hey, could you make this a fun activity for the older folks? Could you make it a really interesting product for the younger TikTok generation to interact with? And how do you kind of bridge this gap? And so along the way, that was the original thing that we got the gang together. And then, so that was kind of the idea, really resonated with me personally. And then team-wise, as you mentioned, I had this great opportunity to work with Dimitri. So I looked at him as a really good friend, giving me a lot of great personal advice. And then as like a mentor, he had just exited his first company. So they sold a company called Alice, big hotel technology company. He was a very experienced CTO and just a good person. So I had watched and spent 10 plus hours a week with him every week for multiple years, just truly helping folks, never asking for anything in return. And so that also really resonated with me as a good opportunity to, hey, I can learn working alongside of him more professionally and working on a really, what I thought at the time was a great idea. So those two things really crystallized the ability to go jump in.
Plus, you could stay up in Big Sky or
Yeah,
Boston area, right?
that also helped, right? Controlling your own destiny a little bit and living where you wanted. So that was pretty huge for me as well.
That's awesome. And and so, now you join the company, and one of the other lessons, that you're kind of pointing out is if you're a really good startup, you have at least one pivot, big
Yep.
pivot. And if you have two, you better have a little bit of money. But if everyone reaches a moment of truth and then you pivot. So kind of what was the moment of truth for our
Yeah. And we talk about this during that startup leadership program. It's kind of three options. It's pivot, persist, or stop. And so for us, that moment of truth was really interesting. We did a lot of amazing stuff for the families that we were able to record these stories for. And just truly some incredible lightning in the bottle moments where fully the mission was bringing people closer together while everyone was still here. So you were unearthing and unlocking these amazing stories. Challenges, which I could go down a long rabbit hole into that. But fundamentally, the main disconnect, what I realized was this kind of time to value. So families were using us as a safety deposit box, which was really cool. And I'm very positive at some point in the future, when that person is no longer with us, those stories become invaluable. But what was happening was that it was that delayed gratification. So unless you unlocked something really novel during that kind of conversation with grandma or grandpa, it didn't necessarily resonate today. And so along the way, we were doing this, and we actually had a good buddy of ours from that startup leadership program who was deep in the nonprofit world. So a guy named Mitch Stein, it really helped us change the entire trajectory of the company. And we had he saw Arbor from 1.0 and basically brought it to us. And he was like, hey guys, I really think you should check out the nonprofit world. More importantly, the reason was because they were trying to capture these really authentic human stories, particularly on video was a challenge for them, in order to go spread the message of their impact to go connect with new beneficiaries, folks that they could help, to connect with new donors. And so we kind of just pulled on that thread, started reaching out to some folks that we knew who sat on boards in the tech community, started talking to real leaders. And what we realized very quickly was that video or storytelling in general was existential for nonprofits. If you ask any nonprofit leader, it is the most important thing they do. But how they do it has been rapidly changing. So it started with basically just going kind of door to door, soliciting. Then it turned into like direct mail, like send a letter to someone's door asking for funds, email marketing, websites. And now this new medium is short form video. It's what we're consuming every single day. And so that for us was the big aha moment of like, hey, there's actual need here. We have this system of how we were recording stories for folks. And then even within there, we ended up having a slight pivot to a new product, which when we originally built the business, it was more of a interview as a service. So we were connecting folks with real human biographers, capturing these stories. Great side of the business, really impactful. But what we realized was with this whole new wave of AI, this is again where I go back to that opportunity favoring the prepared mind. We saw the opportunity with AI. And the opportunity here was that once you got a great video interview conducted, the real value was how do you go distribute this and go get it in front of more people who might care about the work that I'm doing. And it turns out AI is really, really good at helping you go from long form video into whether those are like 30-second snippets for Facebook and Instagram. I can create other types of content as well, like LinkedIn posts or blog posts or email campaigns. So that story is that authentic foundation, and AI can help amplify your reach by like literally 100x.
That's great. That's great. So you make the pivot. When did you make the pivot?
Yeah, so that was another interesting part of the journey. We spent almost a year and a half on the family business and then pivoted basically late last year. Started really honing in on what this could look like for more of that enterprise use case for the nonprofits. So that lasted more or less up until January of this year. And then in January, we really started opening the floodgates to our software product. So we had been testing it internally, which I also think is a great model for nonprofits where we had kind of a service-based business and we were building tech to help solve some of our own problems. And then we've just opened up our beta program basically in the new year to folks to use that SaaS platform, and the results have been incredible. So a bunch of use cases we never even imagined. Folks have been using it, giving us feedback, and it's allowed us to then build even faster because we're getting real feedback.
So take me through a couple of things. One is, who is the target customer? Like, who's your perfect customer? Who do you target? What kind of job titles do they have? Number two, which problem, what's your value proposition? What problem do they have that you're solving for them? And then give me a little understanding maybe of a case study of how that's worked for you.
Yeah, great questions. So our main use case today, I would say our ICP is a nonprofit professional, typically in the role of communications or marketing. And oftentimes that person has more or less three full-time jobs split together, which is I'm the head of development and marketing and communications. And so fundamentally, every single nonprofit has the same problem is they're under-resourced, they're understaffed, and that is the constant battle. How do we just go get more resources to go do the good work that we're doing? And unfortunately, that has become a big bottleneck for most teams. So the gap that we ended up solving for them was really this concept of like, I know storytelling is important. And so it's important for every organization, but really kind of our home run use cases are where there's great human stories. So think education, whether that's early childhood education up to higher education, healthcare stories, everything from ultra rare diseases to big national cancer campaigns, and then human services. So stories of transformation, whether that was drug and alcohol abuse, whether that was just post-incarceration, trying to get back into the workforce, all sorts of interesting bumps along our individual personal journeys that are really transformative with the right support. So it's usually someone in those roles that are trying to share those stories out. And around those use cases of either I need to go connect with net new donors. How do I go find folks? B, how do I keep my current donors in the know of what we're doing, right? So that donor stewardship, trying to make sure folks don't churn. And then third, which was interesting, which never was really a use case when we thought about it, was like, how do you go connect with more beneficiaries? A lot of organizations can go touch a lot of lives, and the bottleneck is just people don't know about the good work and the opportunities there. So that's been the biggest thing for us as an opportunity. And then where rubber meets the road is just, I know all those things are good, but I have a million and one other things on my plate. So I can't make this a priority right now. And two, I don't have the skill set. So most are great storytellers, but they weren't great video editors. So what we did with our platform is kind of two steps. One, we made video editing as easy as editing a Word document. So you can think about editing video off of a transcript. But then part two is we layered AI on top. So I can now just say, hey, Arbor platform, I want a 30-second emotional moment that I want to post on my LinkedIn page. Click a button and we can produce that for you out of any video.
Oh, that's awesome. That's quite incredible. I think it has uses way beyond just the nonprofits or not-for-profits, but it's also nice to be doing good things for good people, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. In future roadmap, we're definitely in conversations, which is interesting. A lot of big corporate communications teams have the same fundamental problems. So, nonprofit space has been this great intersection of that mission-driven work. We're helping some amazing organizations. And then on top of it, it's a great kind of test ground for us of these folks are the most under-resourced. So if we can build it to help solve some of their pain points, it's a lot of opportunities in the private sector.
Take us through kind of what the challenges are, how you deal with that, how do you stay motivated? Where are you in that part of the journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say I am right in the middle of it right now. So we use the analogy, our leadership team, this, if you end up on a deserted island as a castaway, you got two people. Someone is engineering their perfect future plan of what this beautiful, vacation house is going to look like. and the other person just starts smashing some fish with rocks, we very much suggest starting with just smashing fish with rocks, right? That's like sales 101. Just do the activity, get it going, figure out who you can talk to. So that was kind of like our earliest stage, was calling my parents' friends who have been volunteers at nonprofits, any way, literally physically showing up to some locations to go talk to folks around Montana. And then big thing for us was like LinkedIn networking, just reaching out to folks, sharing a little bit about what we were doing, and genuinely trying to get conversations to understand more about their work. So that was kind of like 1.0. And then, I would say still I'm in very much a brute force mode where we have very structured, we're reaching out to folks on a daily basis, whether that's via LinkedIn, via cold calls, and then big cold email campaigns as well. So again, just trying to drum up the, hey, do we have an opportunity to chat with you? And then the bigger opportunity for us as we think about, now that we feel like we have these great case studies and this product market fit, is how do you go get scale? So who are the organizations that I can partner with? In our case, there's some great basically events. So think of like nonprofit marketing summits and fundraising summits and some of these thought leaders that we've been partnering with to go get in front of one to many. And then some other big opportunities with other tech providers. So folks who are selling to our same customer and where we can combine value. So in our case, that world is a lot around like the CRM systems.
Yeah.
So the folks that are actually collecting the donations, and then we solve a gap, which is what content do you send to someone via your email campaigns? And so early stages of those, and it is very much a challenge of, you're in that revenue treadmill, you got to keep growing month over month, and then trying to also plant the seeds for what could be really big future opportunities.
Yeah, I can see the partnerships when you becoming a big part of this because you can add a lot of value to a CRM. You could add a lot of value to campaigns, and there are companies I know that are more consulting, like they go out and create a campaign for them. I mean, those are awesome ways to connect in. And how does your content get pushed out? Is it all the usual suspects, LinkedIn, X, Instagram, TikTok? I mean, where does it go?
Yeah, great question there. And I would say that is one of the biggest keys for our entire platform, is that too often I see people spend a bunch of time potentially creating stuff and then it never actually makes that distribution. So we connected directly in natively into these social platforms. So think like we can push to all the major ones: YouTube, LinkedIn, X, Instagram, Facebook, etc., TikTok. And so that's kind of the external facing. And then we also can push into email campaigns as well. So think about, we're going to go into like MailChimp or just go natively into Gmail and Microsoft. The other really interesting layer that we had never really thought about was more of like internal communications as well. So some folks are using our content even to just keep their orgs mission driven. So you got multiple locations, you're a federated organization. How do you cut up the speech that the CEO gave and just get that also in front of our internal staff? So there were some like really interesting cases there that there's some other content channels that we're also building on top.
How do you make the choice between investing in technology and investing in more sales?
Yeah, that is a really great question and something that we're actively talking about on a daily basis. Two really interesting things. One big one that I just do want to touch on because I think it's timely. This whole AI shift has revolutionized how quickly you can create your kind of MVP version of your product. And I would say the last decade of startups, from my experience, was a big technological question. People were like, can you build this? That was what a lot of the funding was for. That was what the VCs were concerned about, was like, can you actually come up with this idea and make it work? Today, it's really interesting. Our conversations are way less focused on like, can you make this tech work? They almost throw that in as a given. And all of the questions are like, hey, can you actually sell this thing that you're building? And so it's a really funny shift. And then, I still think it is very difficult to build a great product. It can help you go faster with coding. You don't necessarily need as many people working on it. But that thought of combining like, what is the job to be done of the customer and how does the product do that? But not just do it, it has to do it, efficiently, in a very intuitive way, and something that fits into their workflow. And so for us, Dimitri has been a great product leader, our CEO. He was formerly a CTO. So we've got some battle scars from his prior products of what didn't work. And then we literally do this pretty interesting thing now. We're forcing our engineering team to not only like listen to direct customer feedback and conversations, but also joining in on some of those calls. So we just talked about this today. Like, imagine you're a chef and all you ever get to see is like a video of someone eating off the plate, but you don't even see their reactions. Like you have no idea if it's good or not. It's kind of ambiguous. So we're forcing our engineers to actually watch people who aren't technical play with the tool in real time and asking questions, and keeping that as close as possible has been really important for us to make sure that the tech works. So that's kind of like all philosophical. And then where we are actually today, super interesting. We've been really scrappy about how we built our tech stack. So we haven't built a lot of stuff from scratch necessarily. You could think about it as we are a very modular system. So as new LLMs come out or new interesting tools, we can plug it into our tech stack pretty fast. What that has allowed us to do is there's some incumbents in the space of like folks that have already built out some really interesting platforms. I don't know how they did their back-end tech stack, but ours is literally working like 10 times faster. So we're already, we think from a parity perspective, in pretty good shape to compete.
I think the other thing I'm curious about is I love the idea of bringing your engineers along. What do the engineers think of that? Because they often don't like to hear it's not perfect, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's an interesting experience for sure. We actually stole that idea. So we that was not necessarily a novel concept. We came up with that from other startup founders who were part of that startup leadership network. One in particular, Paul English, who was one of the founder of kayak.com, big travel company.
Yeah, yeah.
He is a founder, fascinating human being. Even to this day, he will literally drive as a part-time Uber driver just to be able to have candid conversations with people to test out new startup ideas. Even though he doesn't need any of the more money, it's like innate in his DNA at this point. But he had this fascinating thing where, like, as customer support, basically, if there was a curse word in an email, it automatically got routed to him. So he was like their head of technology and he wanted to know. And he has this really interesting thing, which was like an angry customer is actually potentially going to be your best customer. Care enough to give you that feedback. And there's
Yeah,
something that they're fired up about. And if you can help solve that, you can turn them into like a huge advocate.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so we've tried to kind of ingrain some of that ideas to the engineers is that like feedback doesn't mean you're bad at your job. It doesn't mean anything like that. It's just a customer articulating what they feel like needs to happen based on their experience. And so it's a constant dance. Sometimes it is like we didn't train them right. The functionality is there and they don't know where to click the button. But sometimes they come up, and more often than not, it's like a super novel idea that we would never come up with because they've lived the experience and they know the gap of what's frustrated them. So I would say our engineers are actually pretty excited about a lot of that stuff. And then they see the impact of their work, which is the big thing. So it's so much more rewarding when you actually understand what the customer is using it for and seeing your tool in practice. That's something that we want to try to keep, which gets harder as you get bigger, but trying to really make sure everyone on our team is customer facing and shares in those wins.
kind of switching gears a little bit. You talked about what is it, the SLP? Yeah,
SLP.
yeah. I'm taken through you spent 5 years doing that, almost like a hobby of you did that, you worked at it, and I don't mean to make it sound like it wasn't hard work, but it must have been fascinating. But how good an experience is that for founders? And should other founders consider looking for those opportunities?
100%. I look at that as being one of the most pivotal learning experiences, not only just personally, but professionally as well. I would say one of the biggest challenges that I've yet to see many other organizations figure out. SLP is like a passion project. We didn't get paid. There's a nominal fee just to make sure people are committed to sticking around because if you give away stuff for free, they just don't show up. But every year, I'm just amazed at like the quality of the talent and the humans that come through this program. And the interesting part about it is that we've been able to kind of firewall this away from it being a monetary incentive. So we don't invest in our founders. There's no equity exchange. It is purely a group that you're part of to get mentored. And what that allowed us to do was keep it really pure. So we would have these closed door conversations with folks of, some big name startups that you've heard about the exit on TechCrunch. And the founder will come in and tell you why they didn't make a single dollar because of liquidation preferences, because they didn't understand the lawyer contract when they set up the company, right? Like, so these really fascinating foundational things that I think are like invaluable, and they're really hard to figure out unless you have a network of folks that have gone through this kind of process before. So there are groups out there, even Bozeman, anyone listening to this, there is a Slack community called the Bozeman Tech Stack that folks meet up with pretty regularly on Thursday evenings. And you can go network with folks. We are lucky we have a great VC group here, Next Frontier. They're always able to have conversations with potential founders and students. And then the best thing for me was just the source of like, go reach out to other founders. If you don't have that network, congratulations, you're on LinkedIn. It's free. Type in the word founder, type in your city, and you can find people all over the place. You'd be shocked at just how willing folks are to be able to talk and have a coffee and give you advice. And so for me, that was something that I still strive to do on a regular basis, even though I'm no longer in that New York community as much, trying to recreate that here in Bozeman.
That's awesome, man. You've got a great spirit of giving back, and I admire that a lot. Now, picking up on Montana and Bozeman, you're here, and assume it sounds like you're not having any intention of leaving anytime soon. So, tell us, just going through a few questions, favorite outdoor sport in Montana?
Oh man, for me, it's probably mountain biking, and then in the winter, snowboarding.
Snowboarding. Okay.
There are so many activities. It's honestly hard to choose.
Yeah, it is. That's why you come to Montana. That outdoor experience is, for everybody, it's a little different, but that's fantastic. And then, so you're here in Bozeman. You got any favorite restaurants?
Yeah, I would say our go-to date night spot has been Hooked Sushi. We actually just had it last night.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Any favorite stores here that are Montana local stores?
There's a lot of them. I'm a big fan of Sims Gear. They're actually, I feel like most people don't even
Yeah,
notice that building right off the highway, which is great.
yeah.
And then, my guilty pleasure for just if I could go to any store is Sweet Peaks ice cream. That
Oh
is
yeah.
usually my stop after Hooked.
And those are great selections. And then final thing for people listening, any favorite books to help on your journey that you might point out to other people?
Yeah. Depending on your phase of where you're at in your startup journey, I got a lot of different recommendations. The one that has been most impactful for me, though, for talking to customers was the mom test. So if you look that up, it's a cool pink cover, hardcover book. Really, really insightful stuff just about how to frame questions to get real answers about understanding how people's kind of lives could interact with your product, as opposed to just doing a bunch of interviews where people tell you about how smart you are, and that doesn't really help you actually grow as a product and as a founder. So that one's pretty important if you're going to do founder-led sales.
That's great insights, John. I appreciate it. We've run out of time, so I'm going to stop it here. But we really appreciate the time. Great insights, and thanks for the time. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill.
What a fun interview that was with John. As I mentioned before, he's an amazing storyteller with a lot of insightful lessons. I filled up pages and pages of them, but I really want to just hone in on 5 of them. The first lesson is about the pivot. John talked about how startups have to constantly be thinking about pivot, persist, or stop. That's an important yet simple framework. If things are not working when you're persisting, it's time to pivot. And if you're still not getting traction, obviously, at some point, you have to think about stopping, as you only have limited resources and time. Remember, you're always on the clock and must be working to achieve escape velocity. Now, the second lesson is also simple, but I'm always amazed that it can fall to the wayside in day-to-day activity, and that is customer focus. Successful startups don't make their decisions in a conference room or in PowerPoint presentations. They make good decisions by learning everything they can about their customers, what they like, what they don't like, and specifically, how long is the time to value with customers? Strategies rarely survive first contact with customers. If your time to value is too long, your startup just won't have the runway to be able to be successful. So when you're talking to customers, what's the time to value to get those customers on board and make your scrappy startup successful? Now, the third thing, which we haven't really explored before in these sessions, was working with incubators. He laid out a number of important lessons to apply to your startups. First was the mom test. Can you explain what you're building to your mom and get her to understand it? Do you have a simple and easy to understand story? The fourth grade insight, which founders often overlook or don't have experience with, is the terms and conditions of a capital raise. Mentors, incubators, and good advisors fill this gap. Use them wisely. Lastly, and maybe most importantly, is being part of a great founding team. If you're part of creating a startup with others, make sure you have the right skills and relationships to succeed. This is paramount. John joined a founding team at Arbor. His respect for the CEO is a key reason to join. He had positive experiences at the incubator and the trust level was high. Working with co-founders where the personality and professional dynamics are positive can make a big difference in not only the success of the startup, but in supporting good mental health. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Scrappy Startups. If you get a chance, go to tryarbor.com and check out their platform. For nonprofits, they can be a game changer. Looking forward to our next episode of Scrappy Startups.